Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fighting the Envelope podcast, where we fight the envelope by pushing the current. So today we're going to be talking about the, quote, Mount Rushmore of musicians. And Cameron and I are going to take very different views. Cameron's going to take the more liberal view, and I'm going to take the more conservative view. And that's fine. But you might ask, where did this idea come up? Or where did we come up with this idea? Well, I just happened to be in Keystone, South Dakota. That's where Mount Rushmore is, and I was admiring its beauty. It's such a pretty place in those parts. And then I was just looking, and then I looked over, and guess who was there? No one else but Cameron. We were just admiring this beauty, and we were like, bro, we should make a podcast about the Mount Rushmore musicians. I was like, this is just one of the best things you could have said at this very moment.
Yeah, just a podcast about the Mount Rushmore, not a podcast about music.
Yeah. And the rest is history. And this did not come from some crappy Mediterranean restaurant where we got the worst food and service. No. It came in the grandiose of places.
Yeah. So, like Brandon said, we are going to kind of go in different approaches of our Mount Rushmore. I feel like... And I don't feel like this. You told me that you are going for more of like a founding, like people who really like founded a certain genre or like really like are big
influences.
Yeah, huge influences. Like when you hear like not saying Elvis is on your list, but like King of Rock, you're going for like the
kings, the queens, the princes,
where. For me personally, when I look at the Mount Rushmore, they're not all necessarily like founding. I mean, two of them are founding fathers, but they're not like, they didn't. I wouldn't say like found a genre of politics or something like that. Maybe one or two of them, but I wouldn't say they all did it like that.
Yeah, usually Mount Rushmore lists are just supposed to be fun, but I'm not fun. Okay?
Yeah, Brandon's pretty literal, and that's what it makes this fun, because Brandon and I are going to get into a pretty heated debate right off the bat, and I don't want this debate to take up a lot of the podcast, but I can easily see us getting carried away with debating on this one.
So, first, when we look at Mount Rushmore, the first face we see on the far left is George Washington. I like doing equations in my head, and Robert Johnson equals George Washington. Now, this might sound absurd, but without Robert Johnson, who knows where music would be? I mean, this dude literally sold his soul to the devil, so in the Mississippi Delta, so music could be saved. Cameron over here is a firm believer that jazz is rock's ultimate savior, and while there is some partial truth to that, I'm just not sure that it's 100% correct. I mean, he is just not taking into account that blues brought so many of the instruments, band structures, and rhythms that are so prevalent in rock and roll. But like, again, it's not just blues that kind of had its founding in rock and roll. I mean, you do have jazz, you have country, you have folk, you have gospel, you have a lot of genres, but I think blues is the primary one. And Robert Johnson, that is the face that you see when you imagine like an old-timey, like someone making blues back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And what kind of helped him a little bit was he wasn't just performing in that Mississippi Delta that's so famous for blues, but he was also going to a lot of northern cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, St. Louis, obviously because that's where the northern migration happened, so there's an audience for blues there. And as I said, for music that was recorded around the 1930s, I mean, this dude has an intriguing style. His blues chords are amazing, and he just has raw lyrics. And if you guys kind of need a reference point, I would take a meander over to the King of the Delta Blues, parts 1 and 2, and the complete recordings of Robert Johnson. Or if you don't have the time, just listen to Crossroad Blues or Sweet Chicago Blues. But without him, there likely is no Eric Clapton. There's no Cream, which is Eric Clapton's band. There's no Rolling Stones, no Keith Richards, no Bob Dylan, no Robert Plant or Led Zeppelin. None of that. Cameron, have something to say?
To put it on one person so heavily, I think is very close-minded, because I don't even think Elvis ever cited like Robert Johnson as an inspiration for him. I don't know if like Buddy Holly did or the Beach Boy. I don't hear his name necessarily thrown in the mix, and I'm not trying to deny his legacy or that he was an inspiration. He definitely was. He's a huge staple, but to to put it all on his back, I mean, like, if I was just trying to think of some of Elvis's inspirations, and I was thinking of like Little Richard was a big one, Ray Charles. Um, that those were the only two that I could think of off the top
Yeah,
of my
he's
head.
also has a lot of like gospel music too because he's from like middle of nowhere Mississippi, so he also kind of has that part too. As did most singers who were down south, but
But like maybe like rock and roll, I can see is a little bit more influenced by blues, I would say, than jazz. But the Beatles weren't rock and roll, and the Beatles were heavily influenced by jazz. And I know that he and I were having a debate about this last night. And I told him, when you look at the '60s, there was like a hiccup of jazz crave, and that's because the Beatles cited jazz as a huge influence for them, and that's why James Brown was even relevant. James Brown, didn't he do like an opening for them or something like that?
did he?
Because
That would be cool. I have never heard that,
I
but
thought that there was some correlation between a James Brown concert and a Beatles concert, and I can't remember if it was the same concert or
I
something
mean I
like
know
that.
back in the day it was pretty common to just get like all your biggest acts and put them together. That's really
Isn't that
working.
crazy to think about?
Yeah, how awesome music could be if like everybody. Well, I mean, I guess Coachella and Lollapalooza. I guess
Yeah.
they've reimagined what that could be, but maybe just like a concert where it's like you can listen to three of the greatest bands of all time like in one sitting.
Yeah, but again, I'm not trying to deny Robert Johnson any of like his praise. I definitely think that he's worthy of a spot, but comparing him to George Washington, I think is a little bit of a stretch. But with this list, it's going to be a stretch either way, because it's really hard to compare presidents to music figures because it's two completely different fields.
Well, watch me whip and watch me neither because how does Robert Johnson relate to Georgie W? So without Georgie, where would we be? He played such a vital role in our country's history. I mean, the dude was a commander in chief of the Continental Army. He was the president of the convention that wrote the Constitution, a successful farmer, and you know what? He was the first president of the United States. I don't know if everyone knows that, but that's what he was. So, obviously, kind of like the blues genre itself, there are a lot of important innovators along the way. And for blues, it would be Leadbelly, Bessie Smith, Blind Lemon Jefferson, etc. But without Robert and George, where would we be? I mean, obviously George, you have like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin. Who else do you have? Alexander Hamilton. The list goes on and on and on and on. That's kind of my argument.
That's fair, but I think that like to casual music listeners, Robert Johnson isn't going to be as easily cited as George Washington is to casual history buffs.
Well, that's because they have no taste. But I guess your pick might have quote taste.
So I think that when it comes to George Washington, you need somebody that has a easy to recognize face, but also did inspire and is a big figurehead in the I guess field that you're arguing. And that's why I picked David Bowie as my George Washington. I think that David Bowie is easily one of the greatest of all time, and I think that his face is extremely recognizable. His name is. A lot of, people that don't really listen to music too much definitely know some David Bowie. And I think that it's important to note that, David Bowie and George Washington, at the time at least, I know George Washington had slaves, and that's heavily frowned upon, but I don't think that they had necessarily like low lows, like their lows are hardly even considered that. Like I think that when you look at the highs, they heavily outshine their lows. And I think that they both had pretty respectable characters too. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I definitely am liking where you're going with it, and I don't hate your answer. I mean, I know George Washington does cite David Bowie as an influence, so I'm not hating this argument. I just kind of want to put that on the record.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Because we'll get into some more heated battles later on. I know that.
For his being a more liberal list, I'll take it.
But if you think about it, though, like David Bowie had an extremely respectable legacy, and George Washington also kind of did. So when I know David Bowie did kind of go off and experiment a lot. We were just talking about this, how the '90s were not too kind to David Bowie. But if you look at how he ended things, I think that it was a very like it was almost surreal. Like it was a very magical ending with Black Star and his way of saying like goodbye. And I kind of think you could compare that to George Washington saying that there should only be two terms. It should only be four, 4 years for, you know what I'm saying.
As I said, George Washington has cited him as an influence.
George Washington in the Bill of Rights.
The David Bowie is onto a lot of stuff.
With his quill. But like I said, I think both of them stayed pretty true to the character. Neither of them really like sold out necessarily. I know that sell out for George Washington doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for David Bowie, but when I would compare the two, I'd say, George Washington definitely didn't want like a, tyrannical leader or anything, like anyone that could have too much power. And I think that kind of translates to David Bowie, like saying like goodbye the way that he did, you know what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're trying to say.
It's a little bit of a stretch, but
it's a funny stretch.
This is going to be a fun podcast. I can already tell.
So, who's Thomas Jefferson then? You might ask, Brennan. Okay, well, in equation form, Hank Williams equals Thomas Jefferson, and we're talking about senior. We're not even talking about junior or the third. We're talking about Hank Williams Senior. All right. So he's one of the most famous country musicians of all time. He is so iconic that kids in Walmart are yodeling his songs, even to this very day. Country was prominent before the likes of him. You had people like Jimmy Rogers, who is known for his distinct yodeling, and could also be an Abraham Lincoln in the argument that we're just going to let go, but... then you have the Carter family, but I think his important placehold was important for what country sounded like after him, if you know what I mean. Because, country, it was never going to die. Country was never going to die, clearly, as we know. But where would country be without the likes of Hank Williams Sr.? And, okay, Cameron might be thinking, well, this is a silly argument you're making right now, Brandon. It's like, okay, well, the least he gave us is Hank Williams Jr., who is one of the most important musicians in outlaw country, but... I don't know. And I also think there's this kind of element to Hank Williams, kind of like with Robert Johnson, which I did kind of explain that he sold his soul to the devil and, he died so young. He had not a lot of people know about him, but it's kind of the same with Hank Williams. Hank Williams died really young too, so what could he have offered the world? What's kind of weird, actually, is the only way that this argument can't really be made between Thomas Jefferson and Hank Williams is Thomas Jefferson actually lived to be pretty old and Hank Williams did not. But it's fine, because in his young life, he released songs such as Hey Good Lookin', I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, Colleague, Jambalaya on the Bio, all straight bops to a 20-year-old male. Have something to say?
I'm not too educated on Hank Williams. I really haven't dove into country all that much to where that I would be super familiar with him. I think that honestly, out of your Mount Rushmore pick, this is probably, I think, the best one that I would say closely fits. I think it's your argument with Hank Williams and comparing it to Thomas Jefferson's not it's pretty good. I think that he's sometimes so when I start talking about my pick, I'm going to say how I think Thomas Jefferson is a little overlooked by other figures, and I think that Hank Williams can be said to be overlooked, like you said. He did kind of die off a little young, and so I think that his whole discography is just to like the casual listener is probably not very well known. And so I think that it's a better comparison, and I wouldn't necessarily argue with it. The only thing that I would say is I don't know Hank Williams' music too well, but would you say that it's like pretty lyrical, or like, because when I think of Thomas Jefferson, I would think,
Like a lyrical genius, yeah.
like
I'd say it's very lyrical. I mean, like, not lyrical like Post Malone lyrical, but but I mean, for like being like a country music star in like the 40s, however you imagine that, just like lyrics and like very straight to your face country chords, it's pretty sweet. And our boy Tommy J, or known as ASAP Tommy, a lot of his values like came out of the French and European like enlightenment that was going on at the time, and he just implemented it into our culture. And that's kind of what Hank Williams did. He took what was popular and exploded it by putting his own charm to it, and that's why I think he could be the Thomas Jefferson, aka Tommy J, aka ASAP Tommy, Tommy or Tommy Lamar, Tommy or teases. He goes by so many names. That's, again, Hank Williams looked up to Tommy, ASAP Tommy as an inspiration. No, go in your list.
So for mine, like I said, when I think of Thomas Jefferson, I think of a really important like player at the point of time. He was an extremely important person when it came to the Declaration of Independence, but I feel like he's kind of, I wouldn't say outshined, because when you say outshined, I think that it like dampens what they did, but I would say maybe overlooked by like George Washington, by like Ben Franklin, by just the people that I would say like are cited more, I don't know, with like the revolution or whatever. He was the third president, and I think that it's important to note, like how much that he really contributed. So when it comes to talent on the quill, I would say that my Thomas Jefferson would be George Harrison out of the Beatles. I think George Harrison is constantly overlooked by Paul McCartney and
John
Lennon
and Ringo Starr.
I think that, so if I had to compare the Beatles to the Founding Fathers, I think that, Paul McCartney would be the George Washington. He would be the front runner, the what I'm saying, like the easy, the picture of the Beatles. And then I would
probably say John, but
really, you would say, I feel like Paul McCartney was like kind of like
they're inseparable though. So really, it's kind of like it's kind of like what happened. So basically, probably I'm going to say John probably cut up half of Paul's face and put it on his half, and then they just kind of did a switcheroo, and that's kind of how that happened.
I don't know. Like when I think of like like Let It Be, it's just Paul's face. Like you watch the music video, it's Paul's face. I don't know. I feel like Paul. It could be argued either way. I'm spending too much time debating this. Whichever one you don't say is George Washington would be like the Ben Franklin, I guess. And then Ringo Starr, I would say, is the John Hancock, because he has the coolest signature.
He has the signature, but he's just like not really
That's the only thing.
Yeah.
And George Harrison would be the Thomas Jefferson. I mean, George Harrison wrote so many Beatle hits, like Something, Within You, Without You, Here Comes the Sun, which is easily one of their most recognizable songs, I think. Taxman, Think for Yourself, I Me Mine. He wrote so many hits. And when you look at, like I said, with the Founding Fathers, if the Beatles are the Founding Fathers, after the Revolution, and once we started to get our government going, and like once the gears started working, I think that they all kind of separated a little bit, and when they separated, they each did pretty good things on their own. I think that Thomas Jefferson as a president was a pretty awesome president. He's one of my favorites, And I think George Harrison's solo work is just as good. And I think he's constantly underrated. I think he's a very underrated pick. And that's why I would say that he's more of like the Thomas Jefferson of the Beatles, and then of my Mount Rushmore, I would definitely pick George Harrison. And this is a more recent pick. I know that I constantly switched up my picks for my Mount Rushmore, and I don't think I ever mentioned George Harrison on it. This is a very recent pick for me. I just when I originally started to bring up the fun little like argument of your Mount Rushmore, I kind of just threw out some big like names that I really enjoyed. But when I actually sat down and tried to think of like who I would pick for who, I think that George Harrison's easily probably the most clear like connection out of my pick. I think George Harrison's like, like out of all of these, I think it's the smallest stretch to say George Harrison is Thomas Jefferson. Would you, you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. Again, for this being a more liberal pick on your side, I'm not totally against it. George Harrison's very overlooked. I mean, honestly, I'd probably say solo career-wise, I think, and when you spread it out, it's George Harrison easily, because John Lennon was like prominent for a few years after the Beatles, but then kind of dropped off. Paul McCartney was with Wings and had some pretty good solo stuff, and then Ringo Starr, of course, was just killing the game. But no, George Washington, it's both British named. It's fine. Yeah, George Harrison, I'm okay with that pick. Kind of like George Harrison, he had his mindset on you. Thomas Jefferson had his mindset on us. And I think, especially when you're talking about him as a songwriter for the Beatles, I know like he was very influenced by going over to India. I think he met, is it Ravi Shankar? Yeah, I think it's Ravi Shankar. And it's like a very beautiful like combo. And his concert in Bangladesh is amazing. Simply one of the best things put on this planet. So I think we can John Hancock and say that's an okay pick. On that. But actually, what's kind of weird with the whole Ringo Starr and John Hancock, like Ringo Starr's like autograph in person is actually really cool and unique. But I'm just trying to I don't know if that's such a connection. I know we weren't really debating that, but so basically like the American Revolutionary War kind of started because the British were going over to Samuel Adams and John Hancock's home. So they are kind of the starters of the revolution. I don't know if Ringo Starr really started anything. I mean, he wasn't even the first drummer. Pete Best was.
He wasn't. I was just kind of thinking of like why John Hancock's really like what John Hancock's known for. And it's definitely a signature.
It's definitely a signature.
But like if you also think of it, you can also kind of compare the two. So the reason why John Hancock wrote his signature so big was so the king could see it. And I think that kind of could translate into Ringo Starr, because Ringo Starr used to sit up so high and so straight so everybody could see him. I don't know if did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah, he used to sit super like tall and straight because like he didn't want to be like left out. Like he wanted people to see him. So I
just did it. Yeah, I just did like kind of how like he does. He kind of bops his head a little bit and he's straight. Okay, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking more of, because Ringo Starr was not a founder of the Beatles at all. He was the
last man in.
Yeah, he was the last man in. But
it's fine. We love you, Ring.
We do love. I love Ringo. That dude's awesome.
So next up, Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, or known as Honest Jimi Hendrix. So we here at Fighting are firm believers of Jimi Hendrix's impactful legacy, as you all likely understood after we shoved it down your throat during the first 2 episodes. I don't know, he was just simply revolutionary, and we like that. We're revolutionary, and we appreciate revolutionary people. And just his innovation with the electric guitar and sound effects, just a chef's kiss, as they call it. And as we've said probably a million times in our other podcast, Are We Experience, Access Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland are probably the best trio of albums ever made back to back to back. while rock would have survived without him, who knows how many artists like wouldn't have been able to get. Who knows what artists? What am I trying to say?
Wouldn't have been influenced or would have been influenced by him.
Exactly. Maybe we wouldn't have. Who would we not have without him? We wouldn't have Justin Bieber. That's for one thing.
Yeah, Justin Bieber
Gone.
constantly cites him as his biggest influence.
New Kids on the Block.
Any really big like power guitarist after, I feel like a lot of like the big hair bands were influenced by him because he wasn't extremely flamboyant, but he was a colorful figure. No, not because he was colored, but because
No one would have even said anything. But no, he inspired like New Kids on the Block, NSYNC,
NSYNC,
Justin Timberlake.
Was very the Backstreet Boys.
But no, yeah.
You could argue any big guitarist after him would have been influenced easily.
Yeah, so and then without him, who knows? So because what he does is like kind of like my list here. His guitar was this very conservative object. You can only do so much with it. But this dude said, 2 middle fingers to that. I'm gonna catch my guitar on fire on a stage and just watch it burn. And I'm gonna pray to it. I'm gonna play it with your teeth. I'm gonna make a very conservative song out of the Star Spangled Banner and just put his own magic touch on it. I mean, there's not as much of a strong argument for him being a savior as Abe was, but like Abe, where'd we be without him?
We'd be racist without him.
Oh yeah, so
right? we'd be so racist. The conservatives would have won without him, right?
I wasn't going to say it.
We were going to be split without him.
We might have not even gotten to Jimi Hendrix without him. So
yeah, we might.
I mean, no, we were laughing, but I mean, who knows? We might not be here if it weren't for Abraham Lincoln.
Exactly. Abe gave to Jimmy, so Jimmy just gave back to Abe. He really, like you said, with that Star Spangled Banner, that was for Abe. Jimmy was paying homage.
Yeah, because I think I was reading an article about like how some people thought that he was trying to be like anti-establishment by doing that, but he was just like, no, I love this country, and here I am making an amazing thing out of.
I absolutely hate how against Jimi Hendrix the '60s were. Like, I feel like it was for your list being so conservative. Jimi Hendrix was an extremely liberal figure, even though as a person I feel like he was actually pretty conservative. He was actually kind of patriotic, like you said.
He was in the military. I mean,
yeah.
he was at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and I think he got discharged. But I mean, that's got to say something.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of sickening to think about, but at the same time, he was he was he was for the people.
All right, so Abraham Lincoln, we know that he helped maneuver through the Civil War that could have ravaged our country. He helped pass the 13th Amendment, and I might say that Hendrix is to the guitar what Lincoln is to words. Like, especially with the Gettysburg Address and the Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, Jimmy probably could, if he would have lived longer, if he wouldn't have died, he probably could have made the Gettysburg Address and Emancipation Proclamation just like this really cool like guitar ballad. But and the last comparison I make is, I think both are a story about how a man can come out of seamlessly nowhere and make something great of themselves, impactful, one that generations don't forget. They don't just forget these two. We put them on dollar bills and pennies.
I don't know if you're stressing on that forget just because of my pick.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna be honest. This next pick is a very biased pick. This next pick. While it is biased, I think that this person was a very big influence for the 90s and early 2000s, at least when it came to the rock scene. But I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm definitely biased when it comes to this one, and I know that you have your problems with my next pick. So for my Abe Lincoln, I guess it's going to be Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, of Temple of the Dog, of Audio Slave, of Chris Cornell solo acts.
Of artists who have hung themselves.
Ouch, dude. So, Chris Cornell, I think, in my opinion, could have also been my Thomas Jefferson, just because I feel like Chris Cornell was a background contributor. Like, he was overlooked by Kurt Cobain and by a casual listener, by like Eddie Vedder. I think that Eddie Vedder is more recognizable to casual music fans than Chris Cornell is. But Chris Cornell, without Chris Cornell, there wouldn't have been Eddie Vedder at all. Chris Cornell brought up Eddie Vedder. Chris Cornell's Soundgarden was a big influence for a lot of grunge acts. Even Nirvana cited Soundgarden as some of their inspiration. So I feel like when you look at Abe Lincoln as a president and Chris Cornell as an artist, I think they were both kind of ahead of the curve. Abe Lincoln was, one of the biggest contributors to ending slavery, made the 13th Amendment. He didn't make, he helped pass it. And I think that Chris Cornell, while it's nowhere near as important or significant, helped push the grunge movement and was a huge contributor. And while I wouldn't say he's as recognizable as Abe Lincoln, I think that, they both kind of reinvented the times. So with, Chris Cornell, I think that you came from the big hair, and he brought it down to earth, made it a lot more grittier, and I think that in a way it was kind of how you could compare it to Abe Lincoln and say how Abe Lincoln, changed the path of America and ended slavery. Chris Cornell changed the path of music and ended big hair bands. But, neither of them ever smiled in their pictures either. So I think that I said that it was a bit of a stretch, but honestly, I don't think it's a stretch at all.
Actually, I was going to completely, cap on your pick, but I just had, a reawakening with something that you said. So the presidents leading up to Abraham Lincoln were pretty awful. They put us in just the absolute worst situation to where, everything that happened during Abraham Lincoln's presidency.
And you could say that's the big hair, Bon Jovi.
Exactly. So Chris Cornell, Eddie Vedder, and Kurt Cobain, they actually saved us. They saved humanity from what could have been. They gave us the grittiness we needed. We don't need to be happy listening to big metal bands because it's not even real happiness. It's fake. You know who provides real happiness? Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam.
I wouldn't say real happiness, but yeah, you get it.
I get it. It's still the worst pick on here, but let's.
I'm not going to. I wouldn't say so. Worse is subjective. I wouldn't say that Chris Cornell's a bad artist or.
Oh no, he's an amazing artist.
Exactly. It is the biggest stretch on my list, though. Easily the biggest stretch. I feel like for me, the first two, I went extremely literal and tried to go as, and this one's definitely the biggest one. That is a stretch. But out of this whole conversation, so this conversation came from, I think that we were, like you said, we were sitting in a restaurant.
We were sitting at Mount Rushmore.
We were sitting at Mount Rushmore talking about, ideas for this podcast, and Mount Rushmore came up as one of the first ideas. And ever since we've had this debate, Chris Cornell has always been on my Mount Rushmore. I am a huge fan of him. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. I think that what he had done in the 90s and then what he did with Rage Against the Machine and turned it into Audioslave, he was just absolutely amazing. And what happened to him was
tragic. Not even worth joking about in a podcast.
Not at all. But I think that you could say both their times were cut a little short.
Honestly,
I bet they died about the same age. Close.
No.
Chris was 40 something. Lincoln was
50.
He was early 50. Was he?
I'm going to say 56. We're going to put our money on it super duper quickly.
I'm not going to put my money on it. No. I'm not educated on it.
No. You want to be educated over here.
I'm not
overly. Oh, no. 56. Called it. Look at that. I was right on the spot. Abraham Lincoln got shot at 56, but he could have offered so much more.
I'm curious how old Chris Cornell was now. He was pretty old. Like older than you would think.
So he didn't really have much grunge left to give.
Well, he went less grunge and more like
Singer-songwritery.
acoustic, kind of like I would say even folkish. And I know how much you love folk right now.
I do love folk.
You should listen to some of his more recent stuff. It was very like acousticy. He
Then
did a lot of
maybe
acoustic.
like Abraham Lincoln. If Abraham Lincoln would have been president, we wouldn't have had the mess that was Andrew Johnson. Oh,
Chris was 53 years old, so they were actually pretty close in age too. So boom, another correlation.
boom.
Boom. There we go. Case rested. I think that I made a pretty good argument for Chris. So you can fight me. So how about before our last pick, we take a quick little break, and we'll be back with our Teddy, our big teddy bear,
Our big teddy bear, Teddy Roosevelt,
our teddy
Theodore Roosevelt.
the row pick.
All right, so now we're back with our Teddy Roosevelt pick. Mine, I don't know how you guys are going to feel about it, but here we go. Aretha Franklin equals Teddy Roosevelt. It's the Queen of Soul. What else do I have to say? She's probably the most accomplished female artist of all time, if not at least one that blazed the trail for every female singer that was to come. I think one of her amazing abilities was covering songs and truly making them her own, because she does have this unique R&B and soul style to it, but just the way that she does it, it is simply immaculate. And then albums such as Lady Soul, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You, and Young, Gifted, and Black, just amazing. And then songs such as Respect, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, and Chain of Fools, just all-time classic. She it's very likely that she inspired many of the solo female artists that come after her, such as Beyonce, Adele, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse. The list can go on and on and on, but that's why I picked Aretha, just because I think she's a very prominent female artist that led the way.
I again am not too familiar with her. I'm a little bit more educated on her than I am with like Hank Williams, but I think that at first this was probably what I thought was going to be your weakest pick, but I think that you've been doing a pretty good job explaining why you picked her. She's definitely a huge inspiration for women, but compared to Teddy Roosevelt, I'm not too familiar with Teddy either. I don't know what he necessarily did. I know that he was just a loud figure, and she's definitely a loud figure when it comes to soul. Like you said, she's the queen of soul. So I don't know enough about her or Teddy Roosevelt to really say like I would say it's like a good comparison, if that makes sense.
I know what you're saying.
But I think that you've been doing a good job presenting your argument, and if I, like, because I'm not educated on it, I would agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. So I actually read The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris, and I also read I actually read the whole trilogy. I think it also features Theodore Rex and Colonel Roosevelt. It's a great trilogy, so I'm a little knowledged on our boy Teddy. So he was, if not a president, a man who helped conserve the environment, helped make sure our food was prepared properly, regulated railroads, broke large trusts and unfair business practices, blah, blah, blah. And even if he's not that, then the man was a rough rider. I mean, this is a dude who goes up on San Juan Hill and saves the day, even though the day doesn't want to save him. This is a man who gets shot while giving a speech and completes the speech. This is a man who goes up a cold river to find people who stole his boat. Like, this is the ultimate dude. And Aretha is the ultimate lady. I mean, she was an empowered woman in the civil rights era. I mean, she was one of the female voices of that generation, and just trailblazers. I've said it once, I've said it 50 times. The key word for Aretha and Theodore Roosevelt is trailblazers.
What's the definition of a trailblazer? I'm
It's
a little
someone who
curious.
blazes trails.
A little bit less literal.
I'm gonna take a lucky guess, and I'm gonna say
You
when
don't even know
people.
what it
I
means.
was about to say it.
You said
God,
lucky
come.
guess.
I said if I was going to take a lucky guess, I'm going to assume it refers to the Oregon, like the Oregon Trail, like they were like blazing the trail on the way
Just
to
leaves
go
a
out
big
west.
like
Yeah, so like
wake road.
wagons and like transportation can go through.
Right.
That's why the Portland basketball team is called the Portland Trailblazers, is because Oregon was the final destination, or like probably one of the westernmost like destinations before like the discovery of gold and all that fun stuff.
Interesting. I was wondering where that came from.
I
But
could be wrong. I could just be speaking out of my butthole right now, but I'm gonna say that's probably right.
I when we were talking about this list earlier prior to the podcast, I think that I don't know if I said it then, but it kind of the opposite of Jimi Hendrix, someone who like was like really like presented like liberal but was actually pretty conservative. I feel like Teddy was presented super conservative, but he's actually kind of liberal. I asked you if he was pretty authoritarian, I think.
I'd say he's probably a centrist. I think he looked at things from both sides of the picture, but I think he was definitely more like Republican.
Cuz
Because he definitely had more right wing beliefs, but he got a lot of left wing things done, such as helping preserve the environment, breaking up large trust.
Yeah, because I remember I have read that he was actually super passionate about the environment, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's kind of the one who like I think he like basically started our national parks, or at least got them like going a little more. So
yeah.
he's an amazing person.
He is the most like manliest man that we've had as a president, I think. Like he is like the biggest dad, I feel like. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean it's weird because like when you read his biography, you basically find out that he was just a little kid who lived in
Yeah.
like in New York City. Like he had like asthma and breathing problems, and he didn't go outside till like I'm probably gonna butcher this number, but maybe 12. Like basically, like yeah, it took him like years to like finally get out and like see the world. But once he did, he really explored it more.
You
Than
know,
most
it's
people
funny
can
that
say.
you said that that Teddy had a troubling past because, you know, I wouldn't say it's as troubling, but my pick also came from a little bit of a rough start. And this is my more modern pick. I don't know if are you ready to move on, or do you have more to say about yours?
Where I will give you props on this next one is yours. Like as Teddy is far removed from George and Thomas and Abraham, mine could have been a little farther removed. I think mine just kind of led the way for the rest, but this is a very safe guess for Teddy Roosevelt. So, good job.
So for my pick, I don't know if the audience has been following along, but I tried to pick artists from different. I wouldn't say like generations, but I definitely there's like a good like 10 to 15 year window that these artists were like mostly relevant. You know, with George Harrison being pretty relevant in the '60s and then early '70s, then David Bowie coming in and with the '80s, and
No.
David Bowie was the '70s and '80s, wasn't it?
Like late 60s,
he.
all 70s, early 80s.
I was gonna say he came, but he
But
was like
there's not that far. There's not that big of a break between George Harrison and that.
I thought that
Well,
but he was like super. I thought that was when he was doing like when did he do his movies and everything? I thought that he was like his big like
well,
some
maybe
of his
yeah. By
peak
that
in
point, he
the
probably was. But if you're talking about his
'80s.
peak music wise, it's definitely like the 70s, without a doubt.
Well, I was talking about like relevance, like when they
Oh,
were,
relevancy, then probably the
because
80s. Okay,
Thomas Jefferson was a huge. The biggest things he did was he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but he wasn't the first president.
okay, but, all right, yeah, that's fair.
Back off, bro.
And David Bowie invented the swivel chair.
And David Bowie, he was so down with revolutions. So Chris Cornell was like the '90s and early 2000s.
All right,
So
just get to it.
my my next pick is more of a modern pick, and it's going to be Kendrick Lamar as my Teddy Roro. Like I said, they both had some subjectively rough upcomings. I don't think Kendrick had as bad of a rough. I know that he was from Compton, and that already is kind of like a rough start. But I don't think Kendrick had it too bad. But I'm not too educated on Kendrick. I don't think a lot of people talk about his upcoming You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like when Kendrick talks, he talks more about like his what's expected of him, but I'm not too educated on his past. I think that both of them tell it how it is as well. Kendrick's a little bit more like poetic, and his message is a little encrypted, but I feel like neither Teddy or Kendrick, from what I know, they both, tackle subjects that are pretty controversial, and they were just these figureheads that like I said, told it how it is. They weren't afraid to talk about something. As we've said, Teddy was pretty straightforward. Like, he was a very blunt dude, and was just he put it all out there. And I feel like Kendrick does it in Kendrick's way, but he definitely tells it how it is. I think they both found success super early. I think I read Teddy is the youngest president we've ever had. I think.
Or once he graduated from. It's not Yale. It was Harvard. I think he's a Harvard boy. I think
it was Harvard too.
Yeah, I was gonna say Yale, but I think it's definitely Harvard. Yeah, once he graduated from Harvard, I mean, he was basically like hitting the ground running. So.
Yeah, I when I did a brief research on Theodore right before this podcast, yeah, I think I read that he graduated from Harvard and was the youngest president. And Kendrick found some early success. He was actually, it wasn't like super early, but he was like. So he's 33 right now, which is unbelievable. And Good Kid, Mad City was definitely his biggest, like, you even thought that it was his, did you think it was his debut or sophomore? You thought it was his sophomore act, right?
Yeah, because studio album-wise, technicality. I'm a technical conservative figure when it comes to stuff like this. And you look at it from a very liberal, open mind, but...
But, so if he's 33 now, that was 8 years ago. So he was pretty young. I would have been like 33, 25. And he found some light success before that. When he was just coming up, he went by like, I think it was K Dot, and was pretty big locally in Compton. And that's how he just kind of like, I don't think he ever really had like a big hiccup. I think that he just kind of shot up. Like, people just absolutely adored him as a musician. And like I said, I think they're extremely respectable. Teddy is the dad of all presidents, I think. Like I said, manliest man that we've had as a president. And I wouldn't say Kendrick's at all that way, but I think Kendrick is also extremely respectable. And, a lot of people cite him, even though he's super modern, I think a lot of people cite him as, he's in the argument for greatest lyricists of all time,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, it's not a pick I absolutely hate. I think Kendrick's definitely going to be our future. I think he's one of the best lyricists of our times. I can't wait for his next project. From the leaks, it sounded like it was going to be pretty solid. Obviously, in a few years, he had Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, Unmastered, or Untitled, Unmastered, and Damn, and then all four probably 10 out of 10 masterpieces.
He has one of the most solid discographies and
of a rapper now, or maybe of all time.
I would say of all time. Like, he's pretty consistent.
I kind of like when artists like him just don't shove it down our throats every year.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, then most of it's going to be garbage, which I might make a complaint from one of your earlier picks that Bowie did, because Bowie just has all these irrelevant albums. Elton John did it. Just all these artists were just like back to back to back to back to back. It's like, guys, calm down.
I wouldn't say that it was because they were trying to like sell out or anything. I think that they were just expressing themselves too much, and they were trying to change a lot. You know what I'm like? They were constantly, like I said, trying to reinvent. Like, David Bowie is definitely a person of expression, and I think he was expressing himself way too much, especially in the 90s. He needed to slow down a little bit.
But whatever Kendrick's doing, fine by me. Just don't go 10 years, please. I'll be old by then and might not even know Kendrick released a new album.
I didn't know that he was about to release a new one.
Yeah, his like some of his stuff got leaked, and it was pretty solid. I think it got deleted now, but it was good when I had it.
It was good when you had it. I heard that not to get too far off track, but I heard Kanye is about to drop a new album, isn't he?
I think he is.
Yeah. So 2021 might be a pretty exciting year for hip hop. This was actually 2020 was a pretty solid year for hip hop. I think that Clipping dropped a new album, RTJ dropped a new album, Denzel Curry dropped a new album. They were all really good too. Like I would say maybe not 10 out of 10s, but I'd give them like a high 9.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or not a high 9. I'd say a high 8, low 9.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listen to any of them.
Yeah, I think I've listened to bits and pieces, and I didn't hate what I heard. So respect to them.
But
I think unless you have anything else to say, I think now we're gonna go in and give each of ourselves a out of 10 on both of our lists and our favorite and least favorite pick.
yeah. I'm cool with that.
So with your pick of Kendrick Lamar, David Bowie, Chris Cornell, and George Harrison, with respect to the presidents you compared them to, there were solid arguments. There were very, very solid arguments.
I want you to be pretty critical. You don't have to give me a high rating because we're sitting on a podcast together and we're tight buds.
Yeah, so...
Be like Teddy. Tell it how it is.
The idea of Chris Cornell as Abraham Lincoln, I didn't like it until I heard the hairband thing. Then I realized that Chris Cornell might have been the savior. Like, the George Harrison one is still a respectable one. I'm not sure not necessarily who I'd put there, but I don't hate it. We're going to go 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10. That's what I was going to give yours, was about a 7 out of 10. I think that yours was a little, like...
Say it like Teddy. Say it how it is.
I'm trying to think of how to say it how it is. Yours was a little less. It was a little close-minded. I think that you kind of went for. Easy picks.
Easy picks.
You went for people that have the title as, like the king or queen, like you said. No, you did not like that.
No one, because no one's heard of Robert Johnson. Who else? No one has probably listened to Hank Williams Sr. except for the kid who yodeled it at Walmart. Everyone's probably heard of Aretha Franklin. I'll give you that, and everyone's heard of Jimi Hendrix. So,
well, I'm not saying like everyone's heard of him, but like you said, Robert Johnson is the king of blues or soul or
king of the Delta blues.
Yeah. So I think that they had like pretty big, but with that being said, I think that your picks were also not like. I don't think that a lot of people listen to it. I think that
they should.
Yeah, that you would like educate that you bringing them into the fold is very like
Great of me. Okay.
Yeah,
so my top pick on your list, probably David Bowie, but Chris Cornell still is probably going to get my low vote. George Harrison falls somewhere in the middle, and I'm okay with Kendrick Lamar.
You're okay with that. Let me think. I think that for my least favorite one, I would probably say Robert Johnson. As George Washington, just because I don't think that Robert Johnson's as cited or recognized as much as George Washington has been. My favorite pick that you had, I actually really liked your Aretha Franklin argument. It was going to be Hank Williams, but Aretha Franklin, you did a good job presenting her as Theodore. So I would say
let's shake hands.
Aretha
Franklin.
Aretha, then Hank, then Hendrix, and then Johnson. That's what I'd say.
All right. Well, that's pretty solid.
All right.
And then in a few weeks, we're going to be going back to Mount Rushmore to come up with these great ideas for our season 2, which we're already excited for. Not even done with this season.
How many more episodes do we have on this one? Were we doing 2 more?
How many? Is this our 5th or 6th?
This is our 6th.
Dang.
So we have 2 more episodes.
And then we're going to be taking on the world even more. We're going to do twice as hard.
You spoiled it with the season 2, though. That was supposed to be a surprise, I thought.
Oh, well. Surprise.
All right, everyone. Not enough people even get to the end there.
All right, well, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a great rest of your day here at Fighting the Envelope.